Welcome back everyone from part one, where we just put the engine transmission in the S14, the LQ4 6.0 stage 2 turbo kit, turbo cam in here in the S14, a 1995 S14 with a power guide transmission. This car is made for drag racing. We just put the motor and transmission in, and now I'm gonna show you some more tips and tricks on what I've learned, that as you're getting ready to put the wiring harness on it, which this is a Holley Terminator X. It's not a max kit because my transmission is a non-electric transmission. Basically, it's an automatic transmission, but I shift it manually. That's the way I have it set up. That's the way I built it. You have the Holley Terminator X kit, and you have all these wires and everything that need to go to different sensors, like on the throttle body, crank position sensor, the oil pressure sensor, the cam position sensor back there. You have to go over the side to the coil packs and everything. I've learned, and from doing this a couple times, well, more than a couple times, but enough times to know, there's some things I want to show you that if you can knock these things out while you have the intake manifold on, because once you get the intake manifold on up here on top of the motor, this gets really crowded back here with your fuel lines. Right here, my fuel pressure regulator sitting right here. It's a lot easier to hook up at the ground wires. There's a ground wire that goes back on the cylinder head here, and there's another one that goes over there. Then you have the cam position sensor, which goes right here on this sensor. And then I have an aftermarket oil pressure sensor that goes here as well. So it's a lot easier to do that while the intake is off. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook that stuff up. Then we're gonna put the intake manifold on, and I'm gonna keep doing this in real time. I'll cut the video shorter when I edit for you guys, but I just wanna give you some tips that as you're putting the car together, if you're not really in a hurry and you have a race day tomorrow, or if it's your initial build, you need to be looking for what could come up later. Like I know that when I put the motor in there for the first time in my S13, when I built that car for drag racing, I realized that the more we move these motors and everything back towards the back of the car to get most of the weight we can towards the back of the car, and to help with the times and whatever for racing, that a lot of this wiring stuff that you're gonna do, if you rush through everything, you put everything on, like I put the headers on, I put the intake manifold on, put the throttle cable on, put the fuel lines on, then this area up here gets really crowded really fast. And then you have to like wonder, okay, if I need to put my crank position sensor on, which is right here, it's the one that has the heat shielding on it that comes from Holley. If I put my headers on right here, and then now I have to go under the car, and my starter, if you look down there on the bottom, my starter is now way down there, right there. And the crank position sensor is behind the starter. So if my header is sitting right here, I can't put this sensor or put this plug this wire in that easily. I have to go under the car. I either have to drop the starter down and off the car, then put the crank position sensor, then put the starter back on. And if I already have all my wires hooked up to the starter, now I have to take all the wires off the starter too. So now I'm undoing everything I've already done. But if I leave it the way it is now, and I just take a moment and just realize what wires need to go there, or before I start putting everything together. I take the crank position sensor, I reach behind the starter. I can find the sensor pretty easily because the headers are not in my way. There you go. Just took me a while. I was trying to route it behind the starter bolt. There's a bolt on the block, but anyway, that was kind of funny. I'll remember that the next time I say it's gonna be a lot quicker, the next time it takes longer, just laugh at it. But now we have that crank position sensor on. And I have all the wires right here routed underneath the fuel line going to the fuel rail intake. But there's another couple wires I want to hook up. And another wire you have to hook up is, I was going to take all the stuff off the car, but there's a wire I ran right here. This is black wire. I know, probably don't want to run a black wire when it's a power wire, but I know what it is, so as long as you know what it is, you're okay. This needs to go here to the starter, and that comes straight from the battery. That comes from the battery and gives the starter power. I should have the bolt, yep, the nuts up here. So you have to have one right there, and then I have another one right here, and this one is gonna go forward and connect to the alternator. So that means that when the alternator is charging, it'll send power back to the starter, which is not really important, but the most important is that it's gonna send power back to the battery to charge it, right? And that's what we want. So I'm probably gonna need two hands the way I made that wire. So I'm gonna hook those up, and then there's one more wire as well that you have to hook up, and that's the igniter wire, or the actual like activation wire that goes to the starter. So when you push your start button in the car, or you turn your key switch on the car, that's actually what kicks in the starter. But you have to have a lot of power to crank the starter over. So that's what you have these wires for. So we got that on there, it's 13mm. And I'll show you this other green wire right here that I ran from inside the car. That one also needs to go up. On the smaller bolt, it has an 8mm nut on it, but I think it's more like it's a 7mm bolt. And then of course, the nut I'm looking for probably fell. I'm getting motor transmission now. Happens to do stuff late at night by yourself. Sometimes things just fall and you don't hear it, especially if you're listening to music or have headphones in. So I have to find another nut for that one. But this actually works out perfectly. To show you exact example that I'm talking about is that if I had the header wire on, and that wire is staying on the starter pretty good by itself. But let's say that I had put everything back on already, like the headers and everything else with the fuel lines and whatnot. Now I have to fight in that tiny little area to get that wire back on the starter solenoid. And I can't believe that. So these are all header bolts. Another thing you might want to invest in is you might want to have like a bolt catcher or something to hold all these bolts or anything as you're working on this car, so you don't have to do what I'm doing and go and find them. Let me see if I can find a nut for that one real quick. It doesn't look like it's up here because these are all way too big. So. Okay, just like a few minutes later, I found the nut to go on the starter. So now I have my green activation wire hooked up to kick in the solenoid of the starter. Then I have the one coming from the alternator, or will be coming from the alternator once it's all hooked up, going back to the starter, and then from the starter, the one going back to the battery right there, the black wire. So there we go, that's all hooked up. So we're gonna keep on moving on. What I'm gonna go ahead and hook up now, since I have room and the intake is not on yet, is we're gonna go ahead and hook up the ground wires, which are these little stubby 17mm bolts right here. We're gonna make sure that all the wires are around the way we want, underneath, and that ground wire goes. Find the ground wire at the harness. This one is the map sensor one. It's a map sensor, this should go on this side. And here's the ground wire right here that goes in the back of the head. So we're gonna hook that up. Make sure it goes underneath my brake lines, make sure it goes underneath my fuel lines. I'll hook up that ground wire now. Back of this head. So that wire's hooked up. And at the same time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up the cam positioning sensor, and I'm also going to hook up the oil pump, the oil sensor wire as well. And I'm going to make sure that my transmission dipstick is routed where I want to go. So I'm going to mount it right there, so I'm on the firewall. So make sure that this one is the cam position sensor. Yep. Turn that one up. So much easier when you have all this room and the intake manifold's not on yet. And then the oil position sensor, like so. And we have our ignition, or our injector harness plugs in right here, but we don't have the injector harness on yet on the car. Mainly because I'm going back and forth on what injectors I want to use. Right now I just have the stock injectors on it. I'm trying to get the car to run with the stage, I think it's called a max effort stage 4 NA cam. The car just wouldn't run right. So let's go this side. Over here, we're gonna do the same thing. We got another ground wire gotta be hooked up. Same as on that side. And get that started, which makes it a lot easier when the intake's not in your way. And there we go. Now we got that hooked up. The stuff that goes in the back of the motor, back of the intake. We're gonna move that harness out of our way a little bit. And that harness goes to the front for our ACV, our throttle, and our coolant temperature sensor. Now what we can do is we can move our throttle body into position, because now we don't have anything we're gonna be fighting with behind it. So make sure to take our time. Vacuum hose over there for the brake booster. Make sure nothing gets underneath it. I have all the bolts in it already, so it's fighting me a little bit. Get this on. My fuel line might be fighting me a little bit. So, yep. Fuel line is pushing the intake manifold over a little bit. So there we go. There's an intake manifold on. So this is an aftermarket 102mm throttle body on it. Nothing fancy. It's just a cheap one, I think, off Amazon. I got it a while ago, a year or so ago. So let me grab the Allen head, put that on. All right, as my camera was falling, just finished putting the intake manifold on. So there we go. All the bolts are now tight. We got the ground wires in the back. Now we're gonna hook up the sensor wires up here in the front of the motor, which is the ICV, throttle, and coolant position sensor. So we're gonna route our wiring harness, like so. Move our vacuum line, it's gonna go to our brake booster. I'm trying to make it look nice and neat. But actually, I said we're gonna hook up our wires, but actually we're not going to yet, because I want to put the headers on first, and then I want to put the coils on. Because once you put the coils on here, it gets a little bit more busy right here. I don't have any coil relocations or anything like that. I just do it right on top of the valve covers. I'm using the stock ones. So that's what we're gonna do next. We're gonna put the headers on. So for headers, right? So to build a car, you need the motor, transmission, and the motor with all of its stuff, right? You have to have the alternator. I guess you don't have to have an alternator if you're running a car at a track that you're gonna charge the battery up, but I have an alternator in mine that's relocated down to the bottom. You have to drill and tap the bottom of the block right there to put this kit on it. Then we have the water pump, and then you're also gonna need, I said we're gonna put the headers on it now, right? So these are forward-facing headers right here that I picked up off of eBay. Now this one, get up here where you guys can see it. This one, they're cheap ones off of eBay. I think they were 200, 300 bucks, something like that. Basically, they're forward-facing headers, right? So all the exhaust goes towards the front of the car. And I use these racing, no problems with it. And then I just had like dump out tubes that would come right here, right? Which means I couldn't have a hood on this car, or actually it was on my S13 first. But what I did now is, these are a lot longer right here, and I cut them down. And I just used a welder. And again, I'm not the greatest welder or fabricator, but I cut them down as best I could, straight with my cutoff wheel. And then I just welded it up to give me some more room, so I could actually build an exhaust that would come from the driver's side to the passenger side over here, and then it's gonna dump out through here. Now that's the way I did it, but these are headers. They're pretty inexpensive. So now I'm gonna put those on. I'll be back. All right, here we go. After putting the headers on, the coil backs on, the injector harness on, the vacuum line going inside the car. Here's the exhaust I built. Forward-facing headers I talked about in the last video, or last portion I should say of the video. Going down there, come back up, O2 sensors right there. The exhaust comes out right there. Now we're getting ready to start it for the first time with this new cam in it. I'm gonna turn the fuel on, check for leaks, and once it's started, I'll bring you guys back. Or I might just film it while it's starting, we'll see.